Let me take a little sip and welcome everybody to another edition of Quarantine Kitchen Happy Hour. I have been doing this every Monday since quarantine started, and I haven't been slacking off. I haven't missed a week yet. So this is my 19th episodes of straight culinary education, guys, along with a little bit of kickback time and feel-good time and kind of a safe space where you guys can just hang out. You know, it's something to do. It's local, and sometimes you got people you know out there that are watching along. I got Zalin out there. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Marie is out there. 6 other people, it seems, are checking in, right? So what's going on today? Before I get into today, I should talk about last week, okay? So as some of you may know, okay, going back to last week, I broke down a goat in my tiny kitchen so I could kind of talk about meat cuts with people, right? You know, people go into a butcher shop and they get confused about, hey, you know, what do I do with this chuck? You know, oh, what's a round steak, right? What's a hanger steak? What the heck is that, right? And it's kind of intimidating trying to ask questions, right? And so what I want to do, get my glasses straight here, right? They're always crooked, right? What I wanted to do is break down a goat in my kitchen, right? I can't break down a cow, but I can break down a goat, and I can show you all of your favorite little steaks out of that goat. They're not going to be normal size, they're going to be baby size, right? And I can show you where they come from, and all of those other cuts that you recognize. Hey, I can show you what to do with them, right? I can also kind of show you a little bit about butchering tools and things like that. I'm going to go over a few things that I normally go over in my culinary school lectures. If you don't know, I'm kind of an unemployed culinary school teacher right now. I teach all over town, a couple of local community colleges, and I teach at a local women's correctional facility, and I used to teach out at the Cordon Bleu and did that for years, and I've just been laying down basic cooking techniques all this time, and this meat lecture is part of what I do, and so that's what I'm going to go through. Okay, a couple more people showing up. Alma, thanks for showing up. Hey, stick around, guys. This is going to be some good stuff. Patrick Mooney's watching. Justin's watching. Justin Meyer, good to see you, sir. Fabio's out there. Brittany Cords is out there. People, this is going to be a good one. Okay. Now, last week I did this show, and what I did was I laid out the primals of an animal, and I laid out beef primals using my goat, right? And I talked about the beef primals starting at the shoulder. It was the chuck, and then moving down, it was the rib area. Below that was the loin area, kind of broken up into the short loin and the sirloin. That was a thing. Watch part 1 if you want to kind of check this stuff out. And we'll talk about it in here as well, right? And then finally on a beef, the back leg is called a round, okay? And so those were the beef primals. And then I talked about the primals that we would see on a goat, right? They're different names for different animals. And luckily, goat, also lamb and veal all share the same primal name. So on a goat, instead of the chuck, it's going to be the shoulder. On a goat, the rib is going to be called a rack. Also on a lamb and a veal. Okay. When you get below that whole section is called a loin. It's not really broken into sirloin and loin, right? Or short loin and sirloin, but it's all just considered a loin. And then when you get to the back leg on a lamb, what do you call a leg of lamb? It's a leg. Okay. And so that's the name of that last primal on those animals. As we break this down, I'm mostly going to be referring to beef cuts here because that's what most people are familiar with, right? But occasionally when I break down the rib area, I'll be talking about a rack of lamb, right? And a lot of the time, and usually that's what most people will be used to. But of course, I'm talking about a goat. I'm always referencing a goat. Okay, there's a lot to learn today. I will go through all of those primals with you in today, and I'm also going to go over some tools. Okay, now I don't have the goat here. What I have is footage from last week. I attempted to do another class and break down the steaks from all of these primals. I broke my class into 2 parts that day. I got through about 40 minutes of class and found out that there was no sound, right? So I have all this wonderful footage of me pointing at, hey, all these different cuts and these little steaks, and but I don't have any narration to it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to roll that footage today. We're going to have a little wine. We're going to have some happy time, right? And I'm going to talk you through everything that I kind of talked through during that class. Once I'm going to go through the chuck, I'm going to have to narrate through that. I'm going to have to narrate through the rib section. And then when I get to the loin section, that's when the sound comes back on. And so we're just going to ride it out from there, guys. Like I said, there's a lot of good stuff in this. We're going to go through all of these primals animals in the chuck area. I'm going to show you a couple of really good steaks out of there that are nice and tender, which is kind of rare for the chuck. The rest of it is pretty tough, and we're going to talk about what to do with those tough cuts, right? We're going to get to that rib section. I'm going to show you how to basically do a rack of lamb, right? Prime rib's pretty simple compared to a rack of lamb, and that's what most people kind of see. So I will be showing you a rack of goat today. Sorry, I'll say lamb all day. I'm just so used to doing this with a lamb. Let's see, after that, you'll see me get into the short loin or loin area on the goat, but short loin on a beef. And there you're going to see 4 big money steaks coming out of there, right? You're going to see a tenderloin come out of there. You're going to see a porterhouse coming out of there. You're going to see a T-bone come out of there, and you're going to see little New York steaks. They're all going to be teeny tiny, cute little steaks, and they're going to look exactly what you see in a butcher shop, right? And so that's what's so cool about just breaking down any animal. They all kind of match up on the other animals that you see at the butcher shop, right? And so let's see. The whole time. Oh, by the way, the last primal, when we get into that, I'll have narration, and you'll see me kind of go through the boning out that leg of goat. And I'm going to show you a semi-boneless leg, and I'm going to show you some trussing techniques and a butcher's tie and all of that stuff, a butcher's knot and everything when we get to the end of that. So tons and tons of good stuff, okay? It's going to be a while till we get to that video. Let's see who else is here. I got Joel out there. I got Jude, and Miss Brittany's still out there. And thanks so much for stopping by, guys. Again, every Monday at 4 o'clock, I do this quarantine kitchen happy hour, and most of the time I'm cooking. Today, we're just getting our learning on, okay? And we're going to be learning about meats and butchering, and not so much butchering, but just really like a chef butcher thing, right? Where do the steaks come from, and what do I do with them, right? Where do the pot roasts come from, and what do I do with those, and all of that good stuff, right? And so let's see. I think I'm going to get into it. Now, last week, when my sound was off, I attempted to address a question about antibiotics. Let me get a little sip here. So I will do that now, okay? After the first session when I broke it into primals, I got a little question during that I wasn't able to answer. And so a question about antibiotics, I didn't really address that. When we're looking at antibiotics in animals, as an instructor, I need to teach both sides of the controversy, okay? So let's look at like the standard industry line on those antibiotics, right? As a rancher is going to tell you that if you're raising an animal without antibiotics, you're stressing the herd. There's going to be more sickness, illness. Those animals are going to be kind of miserable a lot more of the time. And there's going to be, I believe the word is morbidity, meaning more of those animals are going to die off, right? And the ranchers are going to lose a lot more product, and the end product, the meat that we get from them is going to be more expensive, right? And so they're doing it for monetary purposes, but also they're trying to keep these animals healthy and happy, right? Another thing about it is they say that the antibiotics, when we get to the end of the food chain, right, and we're kind of fattening up the animals for slaughter, so to speak, to go see the nice man is the way I put it, right? We're fattening up those animals. There's a certain point where we're not giving antibiotics anymore, and by we, I mean the industry, okay? This is what they're saying. This is their line, right? After a certain point, they're not giving any more antibiotics. If they do give an antibiotics, they got to pull it off the line so they can get it off antibiotics and give it, I forget how many days it is, but a certain amount of time, because antibiotics will flush themselves out of the system. Okay. That's why, when you get antibiotics from a doctor, the doctor always tells you, keep taking this until it's over, right? That stuff flushes out of your system constantly. So you got to keep re-upping on those antibiotics, right? So the industry line, hey, these antibiotics are flushing out of their system anyway, and there aren't any traces of antibiotics in their system after they go to see the nice man and wind up on your plate. Okay, that's kind of the industry line. Okay, the other side of the question is the people who are against the antibiotic thing. That question is, hey, are we really sure all those antibiotics are flushed out of the system? Are there any residual compounds in there that we don't know about? Now, I haven't seen any, evidence of, scientific studies of this. I'm not a doctor or a scientist or anything like that. It may be out there, but this is what the people on that side are saying. Again, teaching the controversy, right? Also, so those people are worried, hey, there's still funky stuff going on in there, right? And another thing is that isn't so funky. There is scientific data backing this up, is those antibiotics, when they do flush out of the system of a certain animal, they're going out into the environment. They're not just turning to nothing, right? They're out there and they're killing germs out there, right? Or whatever it is that they are designed to kill, right? Viruses, whatever it is, the bugs. They get out there and eventually bugs start mutating around them. Some bugs survive, and this is how we breed superbugs, by having too many antibiotics just out there in our environment, out there in our system, and bugs are just evolving faster than we can keep up with it, right? So those are kind of the arguments against those antibiotics, right? We're not quite sure about one of those arguments, but one of them, there definitely is some data showing that, you know, superbugs are breeding. We've been hearing about this for years, right? For my part, I like to avoid the antibiotics as much as possible. I don't even like to take them. I don't want antibiotics in my system unless I absolutely have to take them, because, you know, they're killing off the bacterial flora in my body, right? Part of us is literally a colony of bacteria. Like, it weighs, you know, a certain amount, like over a pound of our body weight is bacterial flora. And by the way, we have it on our skin, we have it in our mouths, in our esophagus, all the way through, in our intestines, massive amounts of bacteria, helping to break down our food enzymes and things like that, you know, that are beneficial bacteria that are helping us digest our food, and they make digestion possible. And if I don't have a healthy bacterial flora in my gut, I'm not digesting as well as I should. I'm not getting as much out of my food as I should, right? And so we want to kind of avoid those antibiotics as much as possible. Only use when directed by a physician, right? I'm not telling you not to take your medicine, right? But it's not something we want to use willy-nilly and just dump into our food system. I tend to avoid that mass-produced commodity food system out there, and try to support local regional farmers that aren't using antibiotics, that are trying to get away from those systems and get back to how we used to raise animals. So that's probably more information than this person wanted from her question last week, but that's about what I know about it. Like I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, right? Just a humble cook, you know, and that's kind of what I gather from years in the industry of being around this stuff. Okay, so that was kind of part one of last week's show. A couple of people asked about my t-shirt that I was wearing. I should give a shout out. I got a new, my wife's really just kind of been on me lately. My lovely wife, she's out there watching right now, as a matter of fact. She always complains I wear too many butcher shirts for my old job. You know, she's sick of seeing them. And so I'm going out and getting new shirts, and I went and got one from Vintage Monkey last week. If you guys are not familiar with Vintage Monkey, it is a combination museum, event space, bar, and kind of cool artsy gothic boutique-y thing. Got a thing going on there, right? So it's all run by Ms. Shasta Smith. The museum is her brainchild. She restores vintage motorcycle, her and her crew over there restore vintage motorcycle, racing motorcycles, and just everything you can imagine. The first time I walked into this place, my mouth was hanging open for 5 full minutes. It's just nothing but eye candy for dudes, and some of the ladies too. I imagine this stuff is artwork, right? These restored motorcycles are artwork and just something to behold. I urge everyone to get over there. She's open on Sunday afternoons during COVID. Okay, I think it's noon to 6 over there, and she's in there and she's pouring a few libations in there and just kind of welcoming people in. And you can go in and cruise around and check out her motorcycles and go support a local person that has, I think, one of the coolest event spaces in town. You can go get married in this place among the motorcycles. I don't think your guests would ever forget an experience like that. Go check out Vintage Monkey. It's out on North 16th Street in kind of a funky part of town over there, but it's worth the drive and worth checking out. You can get yourself a cool t-shirt over there, just like I had last week. Love the place, and I'm a huge fan of what they do over there. So check it out, okay? Let's see, what else are we doing? The next thing I wanted to cover before we get into this video is butcher tools, okay? Now, one tool that I wanted to show everyone is not really a tool, but it's a resource, okay? Now, as a culinary instructor, I'm teaching people about professional cookery and going out and working in professional kitchens, right? And they should know about resources that they can use in the industry that'll help them get by. And one of them is the National Association of Meat Processors Meat Buyer's Guide, okay? This is something I show to students all the time, and it's basically got all of the cuts that you can order from a butcher. If I'm a chef and I'm going out there, let's say I'm doing a catering operation, catering function, and someone asks me for a funky cut of meat that I'm not familiar with, a flat iron or whatever it is, I can look in here and find that and tell a butcher exactly what it is that I'm looking for. Even though Keith's never heard of a flat iron, I just point to it in here, okay? The cuts in here are broken down into numbers. Every cut you can think of, you can see on the cover there, every cut has a number on it. Whoa, I'm over here, a number on it. And the numbers correspond with the animal. So if the number starts with a 1, it's gonna be beef. If it starts with 2, it's gonna be lamb. If it starts with 3, it's gonna be veal. And if it starts with a 4, you know that's a pork cut, okay? It's kind of organized like that. Meat Buyer's Guide, check it out. I mean, you know, it's a resource that's been around for years and years. It gets updated every darn year, and everything you ever wanted to know about being like a professional butcher's in here. This is the stuff, back in the old apprenticeship programs, this is the stuff they were using, okay? So I'm gonna toss this over here. Before the last show, I went over some tools. I'd rather just go over that again than show you an old video and try and just talk over it, okay? Hey, Roberto's out there. Good to see you, brother. So let me pull up some of the tools that I used last week. First of all, just the butcher knives. I'm gonna pull out 2 little boning knives, and they're both basically what we would call boning knives, okay? Now, one of them, the white one, is a little bit flexible, okay? And the black one is super, super stiff, okay? It's a stiffy. And we use these guys to kind of, you know, follow through seams and muscles. When we're going butchering things, and again, I'm not a butcher, I'm a chef, right? But when butchers are butchering things, right, they're following seams. We literally call it seaming. And we use the tip of this knife to do all of that work, like a scalpel, just like a surgeon does, right? And both of these knives will do this. This flexible knife, though, I can get up against a row of bones. Like, let's say that's a spine, or this is a spine. I can bend this knife against that spine and cut downward and really get right up against the bones. Am I freaking people out? And really get every little piece of meat off of those bones, right? And so those flexi blades are good when you're getting right up against like a flat bone or something like a shoulder blade or a ridge of spine or something like that, okay? Flexi knives and stiffy knives, okay? These are both boning knives, okay? Another one of the knives in the family. Hey, Faith, good to see you. Ashley's out there. Suzanne's joining us. We're going over some butcher tools right now. I'm going to be running some meat video, and we are going to be talking about some steaks and cuts and how to cook them and all kinds of cool stuff, okay? Now, the next knife this is kind of a small version of what most people call a breaking or a staking knife. Some people might call this a scimitar, but scimitars have kind of a different shape to them, kind of that old-fashioned bump on the back of the blade. Most of them I've ever seen are bigger than this. This is a nice little one that I carry around. It's an old carbon steel model. But the new ones, this is probably, you know, probably a 30, 40-year-old knife. The new ones look exactly the same. The handle looks exactly the same from this company. It's an old Forstner blade, right? And so that is a staking knife. And I use this for long, smooth cuts, right? And I also use the front, that curved area, like a big scalpel when I'm really kind of breaking down bigger things. But mostly it's like I'm using this for cutting steaks, long, smooth strokes. I've got a big old piece of meat, a big old muscle, like a New York strip, and I cut like 1.5 inch thick New York steaks off of that thing, right? Long, smooth strokes. And I get a really clean face on that steak that I can show off in a butcher counter or on my plate, okay? So that's what those big long knives are for in a butcher shop, making those steaks, okay? Let's see other things. I should talk about this. You'll see me pick these guys up a few times. Now, you know, usually you see those great big ones and they call those a butcher steel, but most of the time those are just hanging on a rack. I like a little steel. We actually would wear our butcher's steel on our belt in the shop, you know, on a little chain or something. And it's just always there right to hand. We can really work with it. It's on my left side here. And we can really work with it all day long, and it's just there. You want to overuse this thing almost, right? Every time you're cutting, your knives get really, really dull, really fast cutting that muscle, and especially if you're going up against bone, right? So you want to pull this guy out and just realign your edge. It's like a barber using a leather strop for his straight razor, okay? That's what this guy does for you, okay? He won't sharpen it, but he'll redress that edge. Let's see. Other thing, 2 tools together, okay? I pull out my cleaver quite a bit in this one, okay? Most of the time I'm pulling that out, it's because I don't want to get my sawing into my nice cutting boards. So I pull out my cleaver, and I don't use my cleaver for hacking like a, you know, a hatchet motion, right? I take a hammer and I hammer it through, okay? Usually I like a rubber mallet or something like that, but this is what I got. And you'll see me throw a towel over the back of this thing and hammer this through like spines and things like that when I'm cutting my porterhouses and my T-bone steaks in the upcoming demo, okay? So you'll see me use those two together. We're not really breaking things up using a cleaver like that in a butcher shop. We're using a hammer along with it, okay? Mr. Alex is there. Hey, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us, brother. Finally, another tool, okay? This is a bench scraper, and we use this a lot in a butcher shop, you know, at the end of the day to clean our boards, and during the day, you know, little meaty scraps. Protein's sticky, right? And so, you know, you touch it with your hands or a rag, it just sticks to it. I can just scrape things up really easily. But you'll see me use this to help me French my lamb rack. This is my go-to tool for that. It used to be a little a channel knife, or I'm sorry, a bird's beak knife, a little hooked knife. Looks like a little baby carpet knife. And I would run along the bones with that, and this is my new baby. Don't ever dent the corners of your bench scraper, okay? You'll just rip up your board with it. So take care of these guys. Don't throw them in a drawer or anything like that. Keep them straight. And those are basically my tools. I mean, I don't bust out a lot of butcher tools because most of the work's done with these little dudes right here, okay? You'll see me do other things. One more. I forgot one more. Let me show you this. Right here. So this is my bone saw, okay? This was my great-grandpa's. I think I talk about it in episode 1, okay? This thing was designed, he was using this in the late 1800s, okay? I found this in my dad's basement. I found the little screw mechanism, both parts of that thing, and I had a working saw. I had an old blade around the house, and the brand new blades fit the old technology just fine. It's like it was made for it. In fact, it kind of was, okay? Bottom line is they still make them like they used to, okay? This is an old cast iron one. It's pretty darn heavy to use. Not cast iron, but carbon steel, right? Like the old knife blades, right? Pretty heavy to use, and I'm just using this tiny little goat. I wish I had a baby little saw for this guy, but you'll see me kind of ripping through those bones a little bit. Okay. Now, this is most accurately called a bone or butcher saw, not a meat saw. And I know a lot of people call it a meat saw, but we're not cutting meat with this thing. This thing tears up the meat. So what you'll see me do when I break this out is you'll see me make an initial cut with my knife. And then when I hit the bone, I bust this baby out, saw through the bone, and then I set this thing down, make the last little cut with my knife. Cutting the meat is done with knives. The saw is for bones only. Last thing I want to say about this dude is respect the saw. What is this? What is the job of this saw? It is cutting through flesh and bone, right? Take it very, very seriously. This is one thing that makes me pretty darn nervous in a kitchen. Another thing is using a bandsaw in a butcher shop is one thing that still makes me nervous. Most people, my knife work makes most people nervous, but these things make me nervous, okay? So respect the saw. Right? Let me set that back down. I'm not going to need it today. And I think that takes us, I think that takes us through our tools, okay? So I want to just throw another one of these out there. Cheers, everybody. If anybody's still watching, looks like my cousin's out there. Miss Lily, thanks for joining us. I am loving those eggs you gave me and all of that produce. I'm using every scrap of it. It's awesome. So thanks a lot. She's kind of a, what do we call these, urban farmers or suburban farmers or what have you. And she turned me on to a bunch of product the other day, right? And so, yeah, I've been doing pretty good working my way through all of that stuff. So let's see. The next thing, I went through the butcher's thing. The next thing that we're going to do is I am going to start this video and I'm going to talk you through it, but I want to kind of tell you what you're going to see. I've speeded, I've sped up, I've speeded up these videos, and so you'll see me just kind of flowing through. So let's describe it before you see it, and then I'll kind of just have to say little things along the way, and we'll just blow through it, okay? So first thing you're going to see me do is break out the chuck, okay? I'm going to break down the chuck, and again, the chuck is the name of the shoulder on a beef. On a lamb, on a goat, we call it a shoulder. Okay, you're gonna see me start by, I've got to pull out a little piece of back strap out of there. It's a really, really heavy cord of tendon that runs right along the spine. And then there's a little ridge of spine, and you're gonna see me cut down both sides of that. And usually I would work my way down it, but I have to tell you, my lamb on that day, last week, was a little bit frozen in that section right there. And I was just tearing the meat and stuff like that. So I went ahead and I kind of turned around and came from the other side, the rib side coming from this direction. direction up. And that's what you're going to see as I break down this little chuck primal, okay? Another thing that you'll see is I'm going to leave one arm on. I took an arm off in the morning class in part 1, but there's still an arm left on this one. You're going to see me remove a shank off of that arm, and then you're going to see me bone it out from the inside out. So you'll see me coming behind the shoulder blade and then moving to the front of the shoulder blade, and then it's going to come apart. So as we get into this chuck, that's all kind of what you're going to see. As we get into the chuck, later you're going to see a couple of steaks come out of there. Most of that chuck is pretty tough stuff, I should say. And that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, because when I'm making a stew, I don't want tender stuff. I want tough stuff. The tougher the better, pretty much, because all of that toughness is going to cook down, and it's going to create basically gelatin is what it creates, and it's going to make this gelatinous rich stew that's really, really good, and it's going to be, you know, sticky on your lips, and that's what I'm looking for. Your eyes will be just rolling back in your head, and you'll just be like, you won't just be eating it, you'll be feeling it, you'll be experiencing it, right? That's what the chuck is all about, that shoulder, that tough stuff, right? It's about that slow cooking, braising, stewing, right? And both of those are kind of the same thing. Stew is little bite-sized pieces. Braise is a big thing, like a pot roast, for instance, or a lamb shank. You're going to see goat shanks today, right? So braising and stewing are what we can do. Also, that chuck, that shoulder area is great for like slow roasting, slow cooking, slow smokers, right? We see that a lot with pork shoulder, right? You know, pork butt, things like that. They're going in those smokers low and slow. It's enclosed and it's kind of humid and moist in there, and it just breaks down all that tough tissue and makes it super gelatinous, and it just melts in your mouth. You don't want to do that with your New York steak. You don't want to do that with your filet mignon. That stuff will turn to mud. You know, you're just not going to want to eat that stuff. And so that's what the chuck is awesome for. And so most of the chuck is going to those slow cooking methods. I'm going to pull out 2 tender steaks, or just at least talk about 2 tender steaks here. We're going to look at the flat iron steak. I'll show you where the flat iron is. It kind of rests right on top of the shoulder. So you'll see me cut that out of there. And then I'm also going to talk about one muscle is going to be a common theme throughout this creature, okay? Longissimus muscle, it starts in the chuck. And so there are a few little pieces of that longissimus muscle I can get out of that chuck and make nice little chuck eye steaks, okay? And these are beautiful little steaks. This muscle is the same muscle that runs down and creates the rib or rib eye, prime rib. That's the longissimus muscle, right? And then it runs down and creates the New York steaks and all of that, right? That's all one muscle, and it starts in the chuck. And like I said, I can pull a few of those little steaks out of there, and it's a beautiful little steak that's basically a ribeye, and it comes out of the chuck. Okay, so there's a couple of tender steaks out of the chuck that we'll see. Okay, I think at this point, let's see, a couple of people out there. I got Barry has joined us, and I got Rachel has joined us. Again, folks, thanks for joining. As we're going through these videos, shout some questions out if you got any questions about meat or anything like that, because I'm just chilling. I'm not cooking today. It's just me. It's kind of like a podcast, or kind of like one of my classes I do at school. My Zoom classes with school, okay? This is more like one of those, but hey, it's still a happy hour, and I still say cheers, good people. Thanks for joining us, and we are going to get going on the next step. Let me go ahead. Now, right now, I'm in the shoulder area. This would be a chuck on the goat, and I just removed the neck. You saw me score it with my knife, then I busted out my saw. Right now I'm going down the ridge of spine, and I'm gonna remove what's called the back strap. It's a ligament, and it's yellow, and it's like a giant thick piece of rubber band. I'm working down the 2 sides of the spine right now, and this is where I'm getting into the meat where it's a little bit frozen. Okay, you guys can hear me. Awesome, thanks for the shout out. I'm gonna have a little cheers. Now I've turned it around. That meat was frozen. I've turned it around, and now I'm coming up from the rib. I spoke more about these parts in the very first video as well. You can watch part 1 and get a lot of information. So I've kind of slowed it down, and now I'm pulling off that meat, working up the rib, and I'm coming towards that longissimus muscle from the backside. And now I'm doing the other side. I've got a a shoulder blade in there, and a forearm. Awesome, Derek. Thanks for stepping in there, buddy. Hope you guys get a little something out of this. I'm kind of going backwards on this animal here from where I normally would. Again, that meat was a little bit frozen in the center there in that heavy part. So that is a chuck. And right now I'm kind of folding back some meat and exposing the shoulder blade. That's underneath the shoulder blade. You can see a little steak on top of that shoulder blade. I just kind of, now you can see the back of the shoulder blade. And I'm going on the front here, and I'm not going to remove the flat iron or anything. The flat iron's right in there, but it's just going to stay in this big chuck here. I'm going to leave it behind. I'm just pulling out the bones here. I'm going to show you a flat iron in a little bit from the other leg. Oh, your favorite part. Again, my apologies if there are any real butchers out there. I'm just a dude doing this in my kitchen. And hopefully this is making sense. So right now, it looks like I've got that chuck just kind of pulled together, right? And you would have tied that whole thing. You would have had an entire boneless chuck roast with that forearm, or that first part of the arm. I'm not sure what we call that part, right? All completely boned out. Again, low and slow cooking. That thing is going to take a long time to cook down. There's so much connective tissue in there that's super tough, but that connective tissue is going to melt down and turn into gelatin. And then it's just like heaven to eat that stuff. It's really, really good, melts in your mouth. And I get excited. I'm getting chills just thinking about it, okay? So let's see, we're getting ready to roll into the chuck a little bit more, okay? I kind of did that. I'm going to lay that meat back on top of the skeleton for a little bit, and then you are going to see me pull the other arm, and I'm going to take a flat iron off of that. I'm also going to discuss that longissimus muscle in the beginning here. That's what you're going to see in that next segment. And here we go. Let's rock it. So there's meat just laying on top of that boned, you know, shoulder that you guys just saw. And that's the longissimus muscle right there. That will follow down and turn into ribeye, and it will keep going down the animal and turn into New York steak. So that is your chuck eye steak, is what I was just holding on to there. And that arm goes underneath. You can kind of see that, and that's where I pulled it off. First thing I'm going to do is remove this shank from off of here, okay? I took the other shank off with a knife, and it's a little ugly looking, so I'm going to use a saw with this one. It's a little nicer, okay? A little cleaner looking. I just did a little score on there, and I'm going on through. I like to kind of have an angle to it. I like it sharp. I like pointy food, so I always kind of do that stuff. And I'm just having a little trouble getting that last part off. And by the way, I like to remove that end part too, that other end. It's kind of nasty. I like to get that off of there too. All right, so here's the shoulder blade. You can kind of see the outline of that shoulder blade, or scapula, if you will. We're going to flip that over, and there's meat on the other side. That meat does no work whatsoever in the cow's life. And there's a rigid bone, and that's what I was just feeling. There's a rigid bone right there, and I'm getting kind of along the scapula now and kind of loosening up a membrane underneath the muscle there. And I didn't get it very good here. This was a frozen animal, and it's not as big as a cow, but usually that piece, if you're doing it right, peels off in one piece. That first bigger piece, that's your flat iron steak over there. That's what I'm pulling off. Let me know if you guys are still with me. Give me a shout out. Give me questions. Now there's a membrane on top. Here you're going to see me remove membranes. It's a technique that I talked about in the first class as well. And so I made a little tab. I hold onto that tab, and I shave that membrane off the surface. It's really fast here. I did it slower in the first class. I demoed the same thing. Awesome, guys. Hey, Charles. Hey, Nathan. Awesome. Good to see you, Nate. Now, notice that big old, okay, what I'm showing you here, check it out. That right there, if I cut that into a steak, we would call that a feather steak. And the reason they call it a feather steak, you see the little line up the middle, it's a line of connective tissue in between two pieces of really tender meat. You could just cut it like that and people could eat the two sides, the two hemispheres off of it, but they can't eat the center part. It's like gum, you're chewing gum, right? And so what you're gonna see me do, this piece of tendon runs throughout that muscle. You're going to see me shave the top of the meat off of that tendon, and then you're going to see me flip it and shave the bottom off of that tendon. And then you're going to see the flat iron steaks. Okay. Those are properly prepared flat iron steaks. These are goat flat irons. They're going to be very baby and cute. Okay. Check this out. See that tendon? It's a big, massive tendon going through there. Two pieces of meat laying on a big old flat tendon. I'm going to get it started with the tip. I'm holding on with that towel. Give me a little grip. I'm over at the edge of my board and I just slipped it right off. I flip it over and slip it right off. By the way, this is how we get the skin off of, say, salmon and fish and things like that. Over at the edge of the board, you get the meat on the top and the skin on the bottom, and you just shave it off. Usually a flexi knife is real good for that. Back to the flat iron. Hey, Richard. So right now I'm just cleaning it up a little bit. Those are little baby flat irons, okay? Now I'm cutting them into steak size. Sometimes in the butcher shop, you leave that whole and you sell a whole piece. Okay, so that was the flat iron out of the chuck. I showed you where that longissimus muscle started. That's the dorsi starts in the chuck area there. And that muscle is what you're seeing at the end of this rib right here. I just threw down the rib section. You can see earlier that I sawed off one side of it. You didn't need to see me cut this twice. So I already took off one side of those ribs. I'm going to show you how to measure and trim those. Okay. You're going to see me, I want to get all of the bones to be the same length on this. So I measure on both sides, connect the line, and then you'll see me saw through that. That'll be one part of this, starting that up. This bottom part here is called the plate, okay? That plate, or I'm sorry, let me back up. It's more accurately called the short plate, okay? Now that plate is just the bottom half of your ribs, basically, everybody's ribs, a cow and a beef and a goat and whoever, right? And this is what we would just cut up into ribs, but it's also what we would cut into sections on a beef and make into short ribs. I was talking about how chuck, that slow cooking chuck, is just so awesome, and the gelatin kind of, the collagen breaks down into gelatin and gets super rich. This short plate, those short ribs, you can see the collagen in there, and when it cooks down, it just literally just melts in there. And the ribs, the short ribs that come out of the short plate here, that is my favorite thing for braising. It's got to be about my favorite thing, maybe outside of cheek meat or something like that, right? It's just delicious, and just the texture of biting into it, it's just a dining experience fit for a king. Okay, so the short plate is that bottom part of the ribs. You're going to see me cut that off, and then you're going to see me peel the membrane off of those rib bones still attached to the meat, and I will do a French rack there. Basically, this is what you see usually with a lamb or something. Okay, let's see, I think that's most of it. We're going to start by probably looking at that longissimus muscle again. And there she is, right? There's that muscle. This part was up against the chuck that you just saw, okay? And then it widens out on this side, and this end was up against where your loin or saddle would go. I cut all the bones the same size. And let's see, next. Yeah, I'm gonna show you how to do that. First thing I do is I kind of use a ruler. I'm using a little logo on my knife, and it's about 4 inches, okay? So I'm gonna make a 4-inch bone. I look at the longissimus muscle. It's gonna go a little too fast for me here. I get that longissimus muscle, and I go down about 1/4 inch below that, and then I measure my knife blade, okay, out to my little logo, and I'm just gonna make a little cut here, and then you're gonna see me do that on the other side. Little cut, and then I measure it again, just from the tip of the longissimus, and I cut it again. And now I can't draw a straight line, so I'm gonna get a bigger knife, and I'm gonna connect those dots. Boom. And now when I cut it, it looks like it's going at an angle, but all of the bones are gonna be the same length. That's an important trick right there. Now, I will say this meat, the ribs are starting to get warm here. It's incredibly difficult to butcher and with warm meat. It's just sloppy and flopping all over. And by the way, this big old saw is just like busting through these tiny little goat bones. But I got through it, okay? It's just getting a little mangled here. Again, it's getting hot in there. We're looking at that short plate again. And I think I'm talking about how that stuff just cooks down into deliciousness again, okay? Again, that's all slow cooking work. Now, the rib section that we're getting into, now that's gonna be quick cooking stuff. And so now I've got it evened off. You can see a little bit of the shoulder blades still on both sides of that. And you can see a very, very stiff spine running up. This is called the chine, C-H-I-N-E, and that needs to be removed. This rack is not flexible the way it is right now, and there's no way I could cut this into little lollipop chops or anything like that. So right now I'm cutting down the ridge of the spine. It's like the spine of a stegosaurus, and now I'm getting my saw in there, and I'm cutting through, and I am going to use I think I use my cleaver at the end of this, just so I don't start sawing my cutting board. And I want to demo the cleaver anyway. So there it is, okay? Let me get that last little bit. And I cut that very cleanly, if I may say, okay? And now that rack is flexible. I could cut in between those bones. My guests can eat them one bone at a time, eat the rack one bone at a time if they want. And now we're gonna start cleaning off the membrane and Frenching this rack. It's getting warm. It's getting floppy. My kitchen was really hot last Monday. So right now I'm marking both sides. Let me just stop there. Right, I just kind of marked just underneath that longissimus muscle. Again, that's the money muscle that's running through the entire animal, okay? I marked about a ½ inch below each, that on each side of this, and then I connected the dots. And now I'm gonna start scraping the membrane off. You'll see that line across there. And I'm sorry we missed that when I was talking. Let's go. Now I'm using my bench scraper to get the membrane off here, and I got to get the membrane clean all the way out to the tips. It has to break through on the tip. See how I'm spending extra time to do that? Using the corner there, cleaning those membranes or cleaning the tips. This is the most effective tool I've ever had for this one. I did this for years with a little paring knife. This is so much better. I should mention some chefs will just cut in between the bones and then scrapey. I feel this makes a cleaner bone. The next thing I'm doing is I'm using a towel to help grip it, and I'm just exposing the tips of those bones only, the first inch, going all the way across the top. You liking this, Jennifer? Good stuff. Okay. And then I grab it with a towel, and you see me running my thumb back behind those bones, zipping them right through. They were going easy. They start getting a little tougher here. Rah! Trying to rip through them. Hooah! Right? But you can see that whole membrane peeled off. Look how clean most of those bones are. There's still a little bit of meat on a couple of these. I'm trying to pull it off. Now I'm doing the little scraping trick, the old scraping trick. And now I'm showing you that membrane that I got to cut off the back. My knife is dull and everything's all warm right now. I got to steel that blade. That was painful. Ouch. There's a little bit of membrane, and there's some more of that back strap. It's like a piece of rubber I just pulled out. Look at that stuff. Literally feels like a thick rubber band. I had one extra bone there. I wound up with an extra bone on that side. And now I'm doing that trick of peeling a membrane off of a surface again. I make a little tab on the end and then shave it off. Now the next part, you're gonna see the sound kick in this next part, but let me just kind of do a little lead in here, okay? We're gonna be getting into the loin area on a goat. On a beef, this would be broken into the loin, the short loin and the sirloin. The sirloin is more back towards the tail, kind of where your saddle would be sitting on an animal, whereas the loin is just kind of in front of that, underneath, below the rib area. So it's just like everything, the stomach, the organs are kind of contained in that area. It's you know, kind of where most of the business is going on. Now this short loin area up above the sirloin, this is where 4 of the big money steaks that you'll see in a steakhouse come from, okay? This is where the filet mignon comes from. Now earlier in part 1 of this video, I broke a filet mignon, or I'm sorry, I broke a tenderloin out of one side of this carcass. And I broke that tenderloin into a tiny little filet mignon steak, right? On a beef, it looks about like your fist, okay? But on the goat, it was about that big, okay? Now, a double size filet mignon, I showed people that, and on a beef, it's this size, basically. That would be a Chateaubriand, and, you know, in a French restaurant, we roast that whole, send it out on a fancy cart, you know, and the snooty waiter carves it tableside and presents it, and all of that good stuff, right? Chateaubriand is a double filet mignon that comes out of the tenderloin. If you are like me and you don't really get into filet mignon because there's not much fat in it, it gets kind of dry, you know, the only way I like a filet mignon is to take it and cut it in half into what we call tornadoes or medallions, okay? And that half-size filet mignon, I get a super hot pan and I just sear that off really quick, medium rare, and that's about the only way I want to eat filet mignon. Again, it's super lean. I want it like medium rare and just quick cook. A filet mignon as big as your fist, it's just going to dry out by the time it's done cooking. You can have your filet. I'll take medallions, or tornadoes is the other word for that. I'll take that any time, right? And so I kind of showed the cuts out of that. Today, that's one of the filet mignon is kind of one of the big money steaks that you'll get out of that short loin, and I showed them in part 1. Another big money steak out of that short loin would be the New York. The New York is that longissimus muscle continuing down the animal. It started in the chuck, it went through the rib, the actual rib muscle running through that section is the longissimus, and then it's going to go ahead and start working its way down and taper off all the way in the sirloin, but when it passes through the short loin, that's New York strip. And so I get my New York steaks off of that. And then finally, my T-bones and my porterhouse will come out of this as well. And that's what you're really going to see in this, okay? About halfway through this, I'm going to kind of stop talking because you'll start hearing me start to narrate, okay? So enjoy the next section. We're going into the loin now. Welcome back, folks, from Quarantine Kitchen Happy Hour. Here we go. So right there is my New York strip. I've trimmed off some membranes there. And I should mention, in the first video, those membranes had what we call the flap meat, F-L-A-P. And that was the flank steak, that was the skirt steak, and that was also what we call the bavette steak, or sometimes called the sirloin flap. Okay, so this is the New York area, the loin area with the flap trimmed off of it. Okay, so there's that longissimus muscle I was just showing you on both sides of the spine. And what we're going to need to do, there's the longissimus on the back, and that's kind of more the outline of a New York steak there. Now, this is a very, very solid bone through here, this spine running through here, and we're going to need to kind of take one side of that off so we can get through and cut this into steaks. So one side I will take off, and that'll be basically a little New York strip. And that is the side that I took the tenderloin out, and this is the side that still has the tenderloin muscle in it. It runs on the inside of the organs. The intestines and things are on the underneath, hanging underneath that. That's the longissimus muscle on the top, the New York strip on a beef. Now I'm going to run my knife down the spine, and it sticks up just like the back of a stegosaurus, if you've ever had any stegosaurus, if you've ever broken one of those down. And I'm running through it twice. I've got my flexi blade out so I can get right up against the muscle, or right up against the bone, sorry. And really, at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and get my saw, and I'm going to saw a big chunk of this spine out of here so I can cut the other side into steaks. The side that I just trimmed on, I'm just going to cut that, take the New York strip off of there. So here I go with my saw. You're going to see me use my cleaver here as well. I'm really nervous about cutting into my cutting boards here. So you can see my blades on the other side of that ridge of bone, on the far side. And there's still going to be a pretty good knob of bone on these steaks that you see. but I would never be able to cut these into steaks, you know, just with a cleaver unless I get that spine out of there. And I mentioned on the rib, we call it a chine, C-H-I-N-E. The chine bone is what we refer to the spine as. The chine bone is what we refer to the spine as. There, I think I got it out straight. So it's mostly all the way. I don't want to rip up my board. You're going to see me pull out the cleaver here in a sec. Or something. Or dynamite. Here he goes. Here he goes. Anyway, that cleaver makes you feel like a badass. You see me laying that towel over the top, you're going to see me bopping through this thing. Get rid of that saw. I don't want that big old thing laying around. And I'll tell you, I really should get this knife off the table. Thank you, chef. All right. And I'm banging my way through that again. This was much nicer on my board than trying to saw all the way through that. Madon's out there. Thanks for coming. Dick's out there. Hope you're still there, sir. Now I'm going to go all the way with it. And my cut here down the spine is very clean. I'd be very happy with that. You know, I'm very pleased to show this off. I'm just popping through the rest of it. And so I can pull a New York off of this side. There's no tenderloin on that side. This side has a tenderloin, and you can see the outline of a rough porterhouse steak there. We're going to trim that, okay? But on one side, you can see the longissimus muscle. That's a New York. That's what's on the upper side right now.
Looks like I got sound now.
And now we got sound.
No sound.
I'll shut up.
Oh my God. That'll be horrible. Well, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, please tell me I didn't have sound. I had sound all this time. We are going to keep on cutting here, guys. What I have here is the a cutaway of a porterhouse steak. I'm going to start cutting this down a little bit. I should point out that when we're looking at a porterhouse, we're seeing New York on one side here, and we are seeing tenderloin on the other side of there. And there's a tiny little bone that you're going to see going up the middle of this. So what I will do is just start cutting some steaks off of this thing. And as I go down, this tenderloin back on the backside here is going to taper off and start disappearing. When I start getting down into this territory here, it's going to look like basically a T-bone steak, right? You're just not going to have that tenderloin on both sides. Let's see. Sound. It looks like we got sound here. All right, so let me just start cutting some steaks, okay? I'm just going to kind of start at that first part there and make another one, and another, and another. I'll keep on going, right? And I can just kind of keep going here, and we are going to see kind of a progression here. I'm going to knock them apart. Rather than use my saw, I'm just going to knock them apart with my cleaver. Oh boy. Did not go through. Okay. Next. And again, if you have a bandsaw, you're just zipping these right off. Oh. Boom. And there, right now, ladies and gentlemen, you can really see a porterhouse steak, right? This side, that is the outline of a New York steak right there, right? This side, this is a tenderloin muscle right there, okay? It's a little filet mignon attached, and there's bone in between both hemispheres there. Tiny little porterhouse steak. I'm going to put that next to the rest of our steaks over here, and I'm going to knock a few more of these off, okay? Another little porterhouse. And as I keep going, what you're going to see is the tenderloin diminishing. I'll do one more. Okay. So let me lay these on down and just show you how. So, let's do so. That's better. End piece and like this. So here's kind of a progression here of steaks, right? You can see New York steak and tenderloin here, New York tenderloin right there, New York tenderloin. And as it goes down, that tenderloin's starting to shrink here. And then when I get to this one, the tenderloin's almost gone. Up to about here, I can call it T-bone steak. But if I go any further along, there's no tenderloin on the other side. So if I cut another steak off of here, which I will, this is going to be, oh my gosh, guys, nobody had sound all that time. What a disaster. I think what I will do is have to add a audio track to this thing.
This is the audio track.
So there it is. I mean, that's just a bone in New York. There's no filet mignon over on that side at all, okay? So that's what you would see. You can see that tenderloin just diminishes as you go down, as you go forward on the animal, I should say. So those are a bunch of little porterhouses. Last thing I could show you off of this is a New York strip, which would be a roast, basically. Stand this guy up and start working him off the bone. New York strip. This is what we get into cut into steaks, boneless steaks. There she goes. It's just rolling right off. These guys are super easy to pull off. That's a New York strip. I would have used maybe a little more of a fat cap on there or whatever. But if I cut these guys into steaks, let me use this knife for that. This is the proper tool for a steak, eh? Those are your New York steaks. Boom. Baby goat steaks. Boom. Oh, so bummed about the sound, guys. All right, so these are the cuts from the short loin area. I had the porterhouse come off of there. I had T-bone steaks coming out of there. I had New York steaks coming off of there. Earlier, I showed you a filet mignon that came off of there. I think you all kind of maybe saw that this morning. And then this would be basically a New York strip roast, okay? Maybe trimmed a little too much of the fat right there. This is a lean animal anyway. So I'll throw that on down, and then all I have left is the back leg, okay, the round. And what I'm going to do is a semi-boneless leg breakdown on this guy. This is my favorite roast for a leg of lamb or something like that. So let me go put a few things down. And okay, so what I'm going to do now is break into the round on a beef, on a lamb, on a goat, any other creature like that. We're just going to call it a leg, okay? A couple of things to point out here. You've got the Achilles tendon here, very, very tough tendon, literally a tendon, right? And that is something that they will literally hang an animal off by in a slaughterhouse, right? The sides of beef are hung by those. This guy's just going to come right off. I'm just going to cut right through it and remove that. And what I'm going to do with this guy is basically just kind of cut this guy down to the first joint here, basically. You've got a joint right there, but then there is bone that's going through the rest of this, and I want to get rid of that bone there. So once I roast this thing off, it's going to be just all meat with a nice little handle that I could wrap a beautiful napkin around or something and go ahead and carve off of it like this, okay? Now, normally I would have a little bit more bone here. I've got a little piece of what we call the H bone here, but I cut it a little too far back on the animal here, a little further back than I wanted to go. Usually this H bone is literally kind of shaped like an H, basically. It's kind of the channel where the animal's back door kind of goes, if you know what I'm saying, okay? So what I'm going to do is get underneath that, shave that out of there, and then I'm going to follow those hollow bones back through the leg and get all the way back to this knee. I'm going to remove the kneecap out of there, and then we're just going to have basically a big old meat lollipop, okay? So that's what we're going to see right now. I am going to go ahead and use my flexible blade for this, and I'm going to steel it up a bit. I got Tammy out there. See if I got any new people there. All right. Okay. All right, so whenever you steel, you want to kind of wipe your blade off, and then I'm just going to get right underneath this little bone here and follow it around and just go ahead and remove it. Again, this is usually kind of a larger piece of bone called the H bone, and it's not the letter H, but it's A-I-T-C-H.
Hey, Mike.
H bone. And this is just a tiny little piece of it. I cut way too much earlier. So there's that little piece out of there. And that's basically the hip socket right there. And now what I'm going to do is I've got this hollow bone here, and the end of it has this knob on it. So I want to kind of make a cut around the top of that knob, kind of clean that out, clean that up. And then I can just start working my way down this bone towards the where the animal's foot would have been. So I just kind of cleaned up around that top. And I'm just going to start working my way down the bone. This is called tunnel boning, by the way, and I'm going to get my shorter blade. Get right up against it. And just take your time. This is a patience game, not really all that much of a trick to it. More of a patience thing. Knowing the anatomy helps, you know. And I'm still just kind of a beginner at this butcher stuff. I'm not really a butcher. Just kind of a cook. I've done a ton of these little boneless, semi-boneless legs though. Now I'm getting very, very close to my kneecap. You can see I've got a joint right there. There's my kneecap right there. So I'm about right here and I'm continuing down, getting very, very close there. You can see seams that open up in here. And we literally call, you know, when we're breaking down meat, we literally call that seaming. You follow the seams. Kind of what I'm doing right now. And you'll see my fingers kind of move apart like that too, trying to open up gaps so I can see in there a little bit. Now I'm touching the tip of the patella right there, the kneecap. So I'm cutting around that kneecap because I want it to stay, I don't want it in my roast. It's very, very thin skin right there. I'm not looking to really cut through this thing. I'm just kind of going round and round. And I'm very, very close. I'm at the joint right now.
So
I'm kind
close.
of touching it. So what I'm going to do now is I can kind of see where the joint is. I'm going to get the tip of my knife in there, and I'm going to start cutting ligaments and tendons and anything that's kind of holding things together. Where did I go? It rolled on me. Sorry, guys.
I'm trying to get right in between the joint here.
And I just got into
right
that
in between the
gap
bones.
of the bone there, right? I'm going to get it to the edge of the table and maybe give it a little crack. Butchers type people know how to do that stuff. And now I've just kind of given it the crack. You can see that exposed bone in there now, or the exposed joint, I mean. And inside those joints, there's little strings you got to cut, basically, little tendons. It's opening up. Very, very close. I left the patella in there. I got to get it out. That's your kneecap, by the way. But there's my first long bone. Working on getting the little kneecap out of there, guys.
So cute.
You don't want to bite into that thing. And it's gotten very soft. We're working on it. I'm talking so much, it gets a little soft. I was talking about that earlier, but you guys couldn't hear it. And I've almost got that tendon out of there that is attached to the kneecap. There it is. There's the kneecap. All right, so what I've got now is a nice little roast here. It's a roast that I could stuff or something like that. It's pretty much boneless. And it's got a handle, so I can, once it's roasted up, I can just cut across this thing at a party or something for four and go ahead and serve people up, and I'm not running into bone or anything like that. It's kind of nice. What I want to do now is go ahead and start tying this off. So I'm going to pull a few things off of my board here because I don't want my string to get all meaty. So I'm going to grab all these steaks. You guys can watch me. Delmonico, my flat irons. So cool. My little rack, my little New York strip. It's all going down there. Those are flat irons. There's a piece of tendon. All right, and so I want to pull some string over here, and we'll show you a butcher's tie here. I think I showed you guys a running, what's called the running butcher's tie, but I call it the running chef's tie because butchers don't really use that tie, right? I've shown you that in another class, so I'm going to show you the butcher's tie that I learned, okay? It's what a butcher might use. With the running butcher's tie, you've got one piece of string around an entire roast, and if I'm in a butcher's case and I have a roast sitting in there, maybe I want to sell half of the roast. Well, if I do that and I use the running butcher's tie or the running chef's tie, the whole roast is going to fall apart now. If I have separate strings, I can cut in between them, right? So this is the separate string tie, just your standard butcher's tie. You need lots of string for this thing. And I keep my string in a little container so it doesn't get all bloody and mucky and stuff like that, right? So lots of string, and you're going to need a knife for this guy. Let me clean up. I got too many tools here. They're really bugging me. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. Okay, another something there. And before I do anything, let me get another sip because it's getting hot. I got Miss Brittany out there. Looking good. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for yelling at me. It just took me an hour to figure out that this had no sound. I can't believe it. Oh, I'm going to cry.
You're doing great, Jeff.
All right. By the way, Johnny, thanks for texting me. That's what finally caught my attention. All right, so I am going to be using a lot of string. I have the string in my right hand, the body of the string in my right hand. I have the end of the string in my left hand, and I'm gonna go through, the string is gonna be towards me underneath here, and I'm gonna go all the way up on here for my first tie. What I want is like nice even ties throughout the row. So I'm gonna put one kind of up on top here, and then what I'm gonna do, go a little closer here if I can, all right? For you guys. Then what I do is I take two fingers and I go underneath both of those strings. You guys see that? And I'm gonna wrap all the way around, and with the left hand, I'm only holding the end. And now as my fingers go around, they've made a loop in the string right there. And in fact, one side of it is kind of a double loop. And when they do that, I'm gonna lay the end of the string in those two fingers, thus gripping them, and I'm gonna pull them back through. And when I do that, it's going to make a little knot, and that knot is going to be a slip knot. You see how that slips back and forth like that? The great thing about this knot is if I pull on the body of the string, it gets tighter. If I pull on the end of the string, it'll get loose. So if I don't like where the end of the string is, let's say I want that string to be on the bottom of the roast, watch this. I tighten it up. Oh no, chef, my string is on top of the roast. Well, I pull on this side, loosen it up, boom, and I can move it to the bottom and kind of tighten it up down there. Pull on this side and it tightens it up. And now it's on the bottom, right? And then what I do is I go around a second time and I grab it with those two fingers again to finish the knot. Boom. And it's on the bottom now. And then I just get a blade, take it off. And we're gonna go ahead and tie the rest of this roast. We're gonna truss it up nice and even. Gosh. Yeah, this will be the top. This will be the top. How about that, okay? Okay, so I just did one end. I want my ties to be nice and symmetrical. So my next tie, I'm gonna put over on the other end, okay? So extra string, lots of extra string. The loose end is in my left hand. The body of the string is in my right hand. And I'm going underneath, and I'm gonna go about to the end where it'll grip, okay? And then I take my two fingers. I go up, around, I make a loop, and then I grab the end with those two fingers, and I tighten it. Boom, and then I do that back and forth thing, boop, boop, and it tightens up. Now I want it to kind of correspond to the one under here, so I'm going to keep tightening it until it's nice and pretty. Boom. And then to finish that knot, wait a minute, to finish that knot, I'm going to put my two fingers underneath again, make another loop, and pull it through. Boom. And there she is. There's my second knot. Cut it off. Now that I've done both ends, get it back to my shape that I want. Now I'm going to bisect those and go right in the center, okay?
Bisect.
Remember, I want even pieces, and this is how I get them. The body of the string in my right hand, the end of it is in my left. I'm going to make a double loop, or with two fingers, I'm going to make a double loop out of both of those strings, and then I come around and just grab the end. Pull it through, tighten it, back and forth. Get it to where you want it. That got a little too tight. Oh no, chef, just pull on the end and you can put it wherever you want it, right in the center. No excuses for them not to be perfect. And there she is, okay? I'm gonna do my 2 fingers again, another loop, grab that end, pull through, bang, there's the end of that knot. Over on the other side, and it's pretty symmetrical, you know, not bad. Not bad for just a humble cook, right? Now I go in between each one of those real quick. I'll do these quicker, okay? A little more body here, a little extra string. Go around, double knot, grab the thing, zip, zip. Zip, zip, zip. Wah, wah, wah. In between those 2, get that knot underneath. And then around, grab it. And I'm going fast now, it's not perfectly in line, but it's still on the bottom. Zip. And then I'll just do one more and you guys get the idea. Extra string, boop, boop. Right in between those 2. Go around both. There's too much string there. Go around both, grab, pull through. And then I'll just make this the last one.
What's up, Bill?
And a little tighter. And then around, make a little loop, and boop. And then I've got a semi-boneless little leg of goat there. Let me kind of play with my strings here a little bit. They're not that symmetrical. I started just kind of rocking it there at the end. There. Now, if you don't like the string, you can just untie it and tie a new one. It's not a big deal. Okay? But semi-boneless, the bone stops right about there. Okay, the rest of that is all meat, and it's really, really easy to carve that guy. Okay, so very, very common little truss on a leg, a goat leg. Okay. Let's see, this was the back of the animal, okay? We started out with the back of the animal with the leg, okay? I showed you a semi-boneless cut with that. Moving forward on the animal, we were in the sirloin, and the sirloin I just kind of boned out and kind of wrapped up earlier. It isn't too exciting of a piece, but I got into that short one and I showed you porterhouse steaks out of that. I showed you filet mignon out of there. I showed you a Chateaubriand out of there. I showed you medallions out of there. That was all out of the tenderloin this morning, by the way. I showed you T-bone steaks. I showed you New York steaks. I showed you a New York strip, or at least half of a New York strip that would come off of a goat, okay? Moving forward on the animal, we were looking at the rack or ribs on a beef animal, right? With the rack, I showed you a French rack, right? Very, very common with lamb and goat and things like that. I scored those bones on that thing. I cut the bones, first of all, to a consistent length all the way across. And then I scored the bones on one side and just peeled that membrane off of there until the bones were nice and clean. Cleaned them up and they were good to go, okay? Your little French lamb rack. I'll show you that one here. It's right there.
Goat.
Okay?
Goat rack.
I keep saying lamb, right? But there she is, right? Okay. Let's see. Moving forward, we have the flat irons coming out of the chuck or shoulder area, okay? Those flat iron steaks, one of the most tender muscles on the animal, okay? I cut those on off of the scapula or shoulder blade. Very, very tender muscle, and they tend to come out square and flat, hence the name flat irons. Let's see. I think those were all the steaks that I cut. Oh, I also showed you shanks today as well, right, on this second half of it. This is one of my favorite demos. I mean, you cover so much information in this. Starting out this morning, I talked about like grading versus inspection. I talked about the different primals on 4 different types of animals: beef, lamb, cow, and goat. I talked about toughness in meats, right? What makes meats tough? Age or activity, right? Things like that. The more exercise a muscle gets, the tougher it is, right? And then knowing where tough muscles are versus tender muscles, generally speaking, the arms and legs are going to be pretty tough. The chest area and belly area is pretty tough. If you think about our abs, you know, there's muscles going every which way. But then along the back, it's very, very tender, right? So if you know that much about animals, the very, very tender cuts, you want to use high heat, dry heat method. right? You don't want to stew that stuff. I don't want to make stew out of filet mignon. It'll just turn into mush, right? For those New Yorks and rib cuts and filet mignons, all of that stuff, you want to use high heat, dry heat, saute, sear, roast, you know, all of those really, really high heat techniques, blackening, you know, that kind of stuff. For all of the tough stuff, you want the slow roasting, you want the stewing, you want those long, low, slow, moist cooking techniques that just make those really, really tough cuts of meat super, super, super tender and just melt in your mouth. You can eat them with a spoon, you just touch them and they just fall apart, right? That's what I'm looking for, right? I get a little excited when I talk about that stuff.
That was the show that I did the other day. I'd say that handsome fella summed it up pretty darn well out there. Hope some of you guys are still watching. Let's see. I think, as I said, you know, we kind of covered everything in the beginning. You guys just saw me talking about a little bit about antibiotics in the beginning, and then you saw me break everything down into steaks there. It was beautiful stuff. I couldn't have done better myself. Moving forward, you will see this one up and edited on YouTube very, very shortly, where you can find many of your finer industry cooking classes, videos, and quarantine kitchen happy hours, and videos that you can share with friends and family, and maybe not little kids, but you know, some of the adults in your neighborhood, right? Certainly share with them. Okay, Industry Cooking Classes channel over on YouTube. I got tons and tons of videos over there, many of them about cooking and many of them about chefs. I've got lots and lots of interviews going over there on my Between the Two Stoves interviews. Coming up this week on Between the Two Stoves, I am bringing in a friend of mine that I used to work with. Okay, I know several high school culinary teachers in this town, and they have one of the hardest jobs I have ever seen. I am afraid of being a culinary high school teacher. They work so hard. I'm always amazed at the programs that we run, and I'm going to bring on a friend of mine that runs one of those programs in the local region over there in West Sacramento, over at Bright Career Central. They've got a little career learning center over there in Bright. And so I'm going to bring her on. I'm going to talk about what they're doing during COVID. They are working with Broderick, who you guys all know around town, working with Broderick to feed people in need during COVID and everything. She's involved in educating. She's involved in bringing her students in with helping people, and she is actually helping people herself. I wanted to bring her on and kind of talk about how her world looks these days. Okay, so that'll be this Thursday at 5 on Between the Two Stoves. That'll be Ms. Cheryl Sutton. I'm a huge fan of hers. So you'll be seeing that this week. And then coming up next week, it'll be back to Monday at 4 o'clock, just as usual, my quarantine kitchen happy hour. I don't like to say what I'm going to do too far in advance because I like to hit the farmers markets on the weekend and see what we have around. So we will throw an event up there as soon as I find something cool that I'm going to be doing, and you guys will hear all about that. In the meantime, I want you guys to stay safe at home and keep away from the cooties out there that you all know about. Have yourself a little bit of liquid cheer from time to time, and don't forget that the party's always in the kitchen. This is where it's happening. I've been spending most of my time in my little kitchen since COVID started, and it's the only thing keeping me sane. Okay, so keep happy, people. Keep sane out there and keep cooking. Okay, this is a survival skill, and the whole reason I'm doing this is to just spread the word. I want more people getting off the couch and cooking for themselves. So hope to see you out there, guys. Look me up on Industry Cooking Classes group as well on Facebook. Like, share, yada yada, you know the whole nine. Okay, so thanks everyone for helping me through this part 2 redo okay, of the goat experience. Thanks everybody, and we'll catch you all next time on Quarantine Kitchen Happy Hour. Thanks so much, and we'll see you. Bye-bye. Boop. I said